G'day and welcome to the Gippsland Skills and Job Centre YouTube channel. My name's Jeremy and I'm a Pathways Advisor with the team. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to write an effective application, including resume and cover letter. We'll also touch slightly on key selection criteria. However, this is really a topic in its own that could be addressed separately, which we'll probably do in another video in a little bit more depth. Hopefully you've already watched our video on transferable and employability skill sets. If you haven't, I recommend that you do watch that one first and then come back to this video because it builds the foundation on which we are going to use to create our effective applications. That said, if you already feel confident about your skills and transferable experiences, don't worry, we can still get into this now. There's a few things you need to know to begin with. One of those things is that in Australia, the average that an application is looked at from the time it's received to the time that they decide whether they're going to shortlist you for an interview or not is about 25 seconds. So you have roughly 25 seconds to make a first impression, to grab their attention and communicate information that is relevant to the role that you are applying for and demonstrate that you're the best fit for the team. This also is worth noting though that this is the average. That means that lots of applications don't get looked at for even more than a few seconds. So it's really, really important to make sure that you are making the best first impression that you can and that you are following best practices. Another point to be aware of is that for the majority of jobs out there, your resume should only be about 2 pages. More than that is going to take a long time for a potential employer to read, and they may not have the time for that. So make sure that you are keeping it concise and really focused on the correct information for them. Application letters, which we'll dive into a little bit more, are typically only about 2/3 to 3/4 of a page. Some people write 2 or 3 pages and that's way too much information. It's just not going to get read. So make sure that you are providing a concise, punchy, effective resume and application letter. Just give them enough information to demonstrate that you can do the role. Third point to really consider is why the job exists in the first place. And ultimately, that's because the employer wants to make their life easier. It makes sense. It costs a lot for an employer to create a new role. It's not just the wages you're going to get paid, but all the superannuation that they have to do on top of that, the advertising of the role costs, all the associated tools of trade that you'll need, whether that be physical tools or computers or whatever. There's the overheads for the building that potentially, or whatever the extra costs that they may have, as well as training and just time to get you up to speed. So it costs an employer a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of stress. The role exists to actually make their life easier. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you provide enough benefit to the employer to overcome all the costs and actually in the long term will prove that you can not only be profitable financially, but be profitable in other ways that are critical to the role and the company. With that in mind, let's discuss how to create an effective resume and an effective cover letter. I'm going to deal with the resume first because I actually think that that's more important than the cover letter and actually allows you to write an effective cover letter if you have a solid resume to begin with. Remembering that resumes should be only 2 pages long, there are some other things to also remember. First off, we don't know if the company that we're applying for is likely to use a scan system or not. A scan system being an electronic program somewhat similar to AI that goes through your document before any human sees it and looks for keywords to make sure that it matches at least somewhat closely to what they're looking for the criteria. These scan systems are very particular and they have some special needs to make sure that you are getting the information across. 2 pages is one of them, but the font sizes is another, and the type of font that you use. Also things like graphics and layout. I highly recommend that you keep your font size between 10 and 12. I know it can seem a little bit small, but remember 90% of applications, if not 99% of applications, are digital. So if someone needs to expand something up or magnify something to see it, they can easily. But to go through the scan systems, they like sizes 10 to 12 font. They also like very plain fonts, things that are very simple, like Calibri or Arial. These fonts are very straight and simple. Fonts that have high embellishment or fancy sort of looks to them, things like Times New Roman or Courier or any of those like fancy kind of stylistic fonts, they're not the right ones to use for this. And especially avoid things like Comic Sans or script type writing. Keep it to Arial or Calibri or whatever the default one is now for Microsoft Word, and you'll be fine. I like to keep the headings mostly in size 11 and usually just bold them and maybe underline them to make them stand out as headings, or at least the major headings. And then for subheadings, I might just bold it or potentially shrink it down to size 10. Usually though, size 11 is fine. If you've got a lot of information, you might consider shrinking down the bulk of your information, so your dot points or paragraphs, if you've got them, to size 10 to just make it fit a little bit. For your name and contact details, those are the most important information, so make sure that they are size 12. Now, you can try going a bit bigger, but I don't think it's necessary, and it actually takes away space on your 2 pages that you might need for some valuable information. So that's my recommendation, but it's up to you how you go with it. I also like to keep my resumes left orientated. So basically coming from the left of the page, not having writing in the center, not even the headings. I also avoid things like borders and graphics and little clip arts as well. It may sound a bit dull and a bit boring, but it's very simple, very professional, and very easy to read. And that is the most important part for me about how it stylistically looks. I want it to be something that anyone can pick up, scan through very quickly, grab all the key information within that 25 seconds or less that they may actually look at it. There are key sections to a resume, and they include your name and contact details, and a profile or about me section, your experience, your education or qualifications and certificates, those types of things, your skills and attributes, or potentially your achievements, or both. And finally, typically, you might include your referees. If you're starting out, you might even add an additional section called hobbies and interests. However, if you've already been working for a while and you're looking now to just refocus on a new job, I would suggest that typically you would leave your hobbies and interests out. I know some people rely on these to build a connection with the potential employer, and it may work. And if that's something really important to you, great. If you've got the room for it, do it. But if you are struggling to keep everything to those 2 pages, please don't sacrifice the 2-page rule for the sake of having hobbies and interests. You can always bring up a hobby and interest in an interview later, and it's not as important information. Most important thing, as I already mentioned, is your name and your contact information. It doesn't matter how great the rest of your resume is, if they don't know who you are or how to get hold of you, it's all for nothing. Have your name, your first and last name, your phone number, your email address, and if you've got something set up already, like a LinkedIn or some other portfolio that's worth sharing, a professional portfolio, depending on the type of work that you're applying for, you might include a link to that. And if you live within about 30 minutes of the job, it can be worth including the town and postcode that you reside in, but you definitely don't need to include your street address. And in fact, I would actually suggest it's best not to, depending on where you live. You also don't need to include things like your date of birth or political affiliations or anything else like that. And actually that leads me into something I should have said at the beginning. Applications, or the written application part of the process, is not what gets you the job. It's to get you an interview which gets you the job. For at least 90% of jobs out there. There is always going to be some exceptions, but that is the general rule. So it helps you understand how to target the information that we're going to continue to talk about. Getting back to the different sections of the resume, we've discussed your most important information first. The next section is a profile section, or maybe an about me. I highly recommend though that you don't call it an objective or something like that. The focus should always be on how you benefit the employer. So you're talking about your skills, your experiences, your qualities, your traits. Maybe you're mentioning a qualification if it's relevant and important for this part. But it still should be a very short and concise little section. I typically only write 3 to 4 sentences. Maybe I might include a 5th if I really, really needed to. But I find that anything more than 5, too much. And I would say for most people, 3 to 4 sentences is plenty. Within the information, again, make sure that it's how you benefit them, which is why I don't like career objectives, because it inherently is about what you're looking for. Now, it's great to be aware of what you're looking for. It's wonderful, in fact. But you need to show them why they should hire you, not why you're looking for a job. Again, this is a little 2 to 3 sentence blurb about the core things that you have to offer to the role. I sometimes actually leave this though to the last part of my resume when I'm writing it, because I tend to find it easier to write everything else, which is much more facts and figures, and then bring out the personality a little bit because of all of those bits that I've written already and create my profile statement. I typically like to follow a very traditional order on my resume. So as I described to you before, I like to have my name, contact information, a profile statement, the experience, then education, skills and attributes or achievements, and then the referee details. So following that traditional order, after you've got your profile, the next bit would be usually your experience. Now, within the experience, you typically only need to list the last 10 years or so of your experience. Now, if you're starting out, you may not have 10 years of experience. You may have been starting completely afresh and you're just starting to look for your first job. That's fine. Don't worry. Don't stress that you don't have 10 years of experience. There are other things we can put in here. But if you have been working for some time and are looking for a new job or career change, whatever it might be, typically the last 10 years is all you need to focus on. If you have a job that has overlapped those 10 years, include it. Don't cut it off because it's been longer than 10 years. Definitely include it. But try and not focus on beyond that job if you can. We're trying to achieve a couple of different things. One is that we're trying to not betray our age. We don't want ageism to become a thing. We're also trying to keep it to the most relevant information to them. Most careers, most industries will change quite a bit in 10 years. So although you may have some wonderful experience from 15 or more years ago, it's not necessarily as relevant as you might expect. Things have changed, technology changes, expectations changes, safety processes and policies, all these kinds of things. There's so much that changes in 10 years that some of it actually becomes less relevant than you would expect. It also means that you can keep it to 2 pages more easily. So 10 years is plenty. Most employers only really care about that. And if you have gaps in that time, well, okay, maybe we can explain some of those gaps, or we are going to look at other things that we can bring to the potential employer. Within the jobs or experience that you're listing, now I want to be very clear here, experience is the key word. It's not actually jobs. It can include jobs, of course, but it may be things like volunteer experience. It may be something like you've been a carer for home. It doesn't matter whether you've been paid or not paid. What matters is what your experience is. What have you done that you can bring out and show them to transfer skills and knowledge to apply to a particular role. That includes things like being a stay-at-home mum or stay-at-home dad. Whatever your scenario, there is so much that you have to offer from your experiences. Remember at the start I mentioned that these transferable skills and experience videos are really core foundation to all this. Well, again, if you're not sure what you bring to the table, maybe rewatch that video and come back to this one. For example, a stay-at-home parent may not necessarily think that they have much to offer. In fact, my experience is with my clients when they are a return to work parent, they typically downplay what they have to offer. They say things like, I was just a parent for the last 10, 15, 18 years or more. The reality is though, you've actually been working for 24/7 for the last however many years it's been. And you've been doing so much as a parent. There are things like you've been a carer, you've been a mentor, you've been a teacher, you've been a taxi service, you've been a doctor's assistant, you've been a dental assistant, you've been a chef, you've been a cleaner, you've been all kinds of things. And that's just brushing on some very surface levels. If you really want to break it down, you'll actually find there's so much more involved as well. My point is, don't downplay what you have to offer and don't apologize for whether you've been paid or unpaid. Don't dismiss the experiences that you have, but do list them. Whatever you've been doing in the last 10 years, describe it and use it to bring out transferable experience and skills that might be able to suit the role. Now, all of that said, when you're actually writing out your experience section, it goes in reverse chronological order. I think I said that right, reverse chronological order. And what I mean by that is most recent first. But then there is some important hierarchy of information to follow. And unfortunately, I see quite a lot of people get this wrong. Too often I see people put either the date or the company first. But the most important part is the role that you did. I want to see you put whatever your position was, and if you haven't had an official position, create one for yourself. Again, it might be a stay-at-home parent, or it might have been a homemaker, whatever, or maybe you were a labourer or a volunteer, if you want to call it that. I would prefer to see something like a retail person or customer service communicator, whatever it might be that's relevant to your experience. But put a title first. Then you would have your company that you've worked for, and then after that, you would have the date, or even perhaps have the date under the title and the company that you worked for. Once you have the title and the company and the date, then we're going to go into dot points about what you have done in your role. Depending on the type of role that you're applying for, sometimes you might be focusing more on the facts and figures of what you've done. Sometimes you might be focusing more on achievements. Sometimes you might be focusing on things like sales results, especially when you are applying for a sales role. Look at the job description that you're applying to and draw out what they are looking for and put that information in there from your experience. And try and describe it in a way that makes you unique, that really demonstrates what you have. For example, perhaps you've worked in a fast food or hospitality environment, and you could just say, I cooked food. And that's true, and that's fine. You could add information like you worked according to health and safety regulations, or that you met various food regulations. You could talk about how you finally prepared the food. Maybe it was julienning stuff, or preparing it to a certain style and quality that is necessary for how food was presented well. Whatever it may be. Maybe it's something as simple as you cleaned desks and tables. Well, you could talk about meeting hygiene standards and making sure that the environment that you worked in was a health and safety compliant place. There is always a bit of extra detail that you can go into that will show how you fit the needs of that role more effectively. When you're filling out the job description, you may feel the need to write a lot of dot points. And if it's the most recent job, perhaps that's the right way to go. You might write up to about 6 points for the role. However, if it's older, typically 2 to 3, maybe up to 4 is plenty. Again, focus on the highest aspects that are most related to what you are applying for now. The most transferable, the most important to the new role. So you've got your first description of your employment experience in there, or perhaps it was some other kind of experience like a volunteer, maybe it was at a club, or again, being a stay-at-home parent or a carer, whatever it may be. If you've got some experience, please put it in there. If you haven't got experience of any kind, if there's really nothing that you can think of, okay, move on to the next section of education. But I'm sure if you really think about it, there are some ways that you can bring out some skills and experiences from something that you've been involved in. Even if it's only a day a week, maybe you've been participating in a local club, or you're part of some social group or some other kind of group. Maybe you're at a community house, whatever it may be. I'm sure if you really think about it, you'll be able to find some things that you can draw out from and put onto your resume. As I said, it's a reverse chronological order, so make sure that you are including more. As I said, it's a reverse chronological order. So once you've got the most recent job, move on to the next most recent and keep going on until you've got all the jobs that you think are important and relevant to the role and are within the last 10 or so years. If you have had multiple jobs, maybe you've worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time, and some of them aren't very relevant to the role that you're applying for now, maybe consider whether it's worth including them. Sometimes people struggle with keeping their resumes to those 2 pages because they feel the need to include absolutely all the information that they've ever done. Just be selective about what you include as long as it's important to what you're applying for. Once you've got your experience section done, the next section is your education. Now you may also include in here certifications and other personal and professional development. Some people have got lots of experience in their life and have done lots of study, lots of courses, professional and personal development, and some of it's not really relevant to what they're applying for. So in those cases, leave that unimportant information out. It's not that it's unimportant to you, but it's just unimportant to the role that you're applying for. As far as how to lay out the information in the education, keep it dot points and keep it simple. Just write the title of the course that you've done and where you've studied it and maybe when you completed it. Some people prefer to just do the highest level of their education, so a bachelor or a doctorate even, and go backwards. Some people just like to follow chronological order. Whatever it may be, you choose your method. I personally think it's better to separate the accredited courses from your personal and professional development and other tickets like that. Maybe you've done a diploma or a bachelor level course. So that would be my first level or in my first section, and you might have done a couple of different certificate level courses as well as a bachelor. Well, all of those would group into that one. And then within that, you might either follow the hierarchy of the highest level or maybe when it was most recently done. I would then include things like any personal and professional development. Maybe it's things like mental health first aid or how to handle difficult customers or how to manage your time more effectively, those kinds of things. Whatever the courses that you may have done throughout your career, those I would then include. Or you could maybe include certificates that you've done, such as you've gotten your white card ticket, which is a work safely in construction industry, or a forklift ticket or a truck license or something along those lines. You could include those and batch those items together. Keep it simple though when you're filling out the education. Some people feel the temptation to list all the core units of the courses that they've done or just go into way too much detail. You don't need to. If it's relevant to the employer and they need to know about it, they will understand what's already involved in that course. If they don't need to know or it's not relevant, they don't care. So just keep it concise. You don't want to take up too much space. Once you've got the education section sorted out however you would like it to make it most effective and easy to follow, then the next section is your skills and attributes. Or you might even include an achievement section. Sometimes people like to include the achievements as part of their experience, and if you've done that, that's fine, don't include it again. But sometimes people like to separate it. You might have a few achievements that you specifically wanted to list, you might include it now, but let's move on to assume that you're just going into the skills and attributes. Now, for those who don't know what I'm talking about by skills and attributes, a skill is something that you essentially do, and an attribute or a trait or a quality is essentially something that you have or are. Now, it's a very simple way of explaining it, but it gets the point across. Skills might be things like communication skills, or you might have hand tool operation. Maybe you've learnt to weld, or maybe you have photography skills, or you have presentation skills, whatever it may be and is relevant to the role. These are the skills that you are talking about. Attributes and qualities are things like you might be a reliable person, you've got a strong work ethic, you might be friendly, you might be upbeat, you might be a positive person. Whatever it is, these are the types of things to include, and again, focus on how they benefit the role. I typically only include about 8 points in total, so maybe it's 4 or more skills and fill out the rest with attributes. Sometimes if I've got a lot of qualities that are really strongly aligned with the role, I might bump that up to 10 or 12, but I don't like to go any more than that just because it's, again, too much information and it's unlikely to get read. I keep them in dot points and I typically group the skills together and the attributes together. And I try and focus on the most important things first. I want the employer to be able to see
the best and most relevant information straight away. Sometimes, depending on how much room you've got left on your resume, you may need to split this section into columns. Now, columns is fine, but please don't use tables. Tables do not work with those scan systems, nor do text boxes. Make sure that this is all typed out in a normal letter style format, or again in this resume. Dot points are fine, columns are fine, but do not use tables. You'll lose the information. The next section is optional. It's called hobbies and interests. As I had mentioned already, it's typically not something you would use if you already have an extensive work history. However, you may not have much experience, or you may not even have any experience, or nothing that's been fairly recent. And if that's the case, hobbies and interests can actually provide a valuable connection and still demonstrate some valuable skills and attributes that are transferable to the role. However, it's really critical what you put in there and how you put it in there. So, what I mean by what you put in there, think about your hobbies and interests. I'm sure you have, like me, many hobbies and interests, and you don't necessarily think that all of them are relevant to the role. Depending on the hobby and interest that you have, it could be seen as risky. It's really important that you control, or at least try and influence, how people perceive your hobbies and interests. And the way to do that is to give a bit more information. So, for example, some people just list the absolute basics of what their hobbies are. It might be something like, I ride motorbikes, or even just motorbikes. I ride motorbikes myself. I ride them all the time and I love them. However, there are a lot of negative stereotypes and assumptions and associations with motorcycle riding. There are also a lot of benefits and pros to them. However, people tend to be a little bit negative focused, and so you run the risk of a manager in particular who has to weigh up risk versus reward with seeing all the problems without you controlling the narrative. So rather than just say motorbike riding, what I might add to it is how it helps me with my mental health, how it builds my awareness of my surroundings. It helps me to think quickly and clearly. It helps me to react quickly and make decisions on the spot. It may be that it helps my enthusiasm. It may help me build connections with the community. Whatever the reality is, that's what I would focus on, the positives. And I'd really try and make sure that that's what I am getting the potential reader to think about. Perhaps though you're not a motorcycle rider, maybe you're something more mainstream like a sports player, especially if it's something like football, for example, or netball. If you just list that, you run the risk of being seen that you're likely to get injured regularly. You might, or like I was as a motorcycle rider, I'm likely to be involved in a crash or injured. So similarly with sport, you run the risk of being seen as potentially injured or not available for other reasons as well, that you may need to be at training more often than not, whatever it might be. There are lots of risks potentially involved with it. However, if you control the narrative, if you point out the positives, there is a lot to be shown. For example, you might be a team player, you have strong communication. Again, you might be very aware of your surroundings, you might be able to think and react quickly, you may be able to manage your time effectively, potentially depending on how you balance your life and needs for training, etc. Whatever there are, again, there's also community connection, which can be really important to a lot of roles. So again, think about how you control the narrative and how you can put a positive light on anything that you do. Show the skills that are relevant, the traits that are relevant in that hobby to what you are applying for. It's all about layering and stacking on more and more evidence that you have what is necessary to do the role that you're applying for well and quickly and effectively. The next section after this is your referees. And that's right, I did use the term referees. It's not actually references. References are what the referees provide. And it comes from back in the day, well before the internet, when people used to provide written references as someone left a job. A manager might write out a letter and you would include a photocopy of that with your application when you applied for a job. These days, and has been for a long time now, people are just providing contact information and someone is calling that referee for a reference about the person. Now, it's important to include at least 2 people as referees. If they specifically ask for more than that, then obviously include however many more they ask for. But if they don't ask for a specific number, include at least 2. I really recommend, though, that you do include the information of the referees. That's because when you write something like available upon request, it actually just adds a lot of layers of uncertainty. It communicates to the potential employer that you aren't sure about what they're going to say, that maybe you haven't contacted them yet, maybe you've potentially got something to hide, or at the very least, you just haven't tried to make their life easier. Here is an example of where you can demonstrate that you can make the employer's life easier right from the start by providing that information from the get-go. I know as a previous manager and as someone who has dealt with many applications, if I could avoid having to call you to call someone else to get a reference about you, I would be really happy about that. I don't like spending extra time doing something that could have just been provided to me right from the beginning. Make sure that you include the contact details of 2 referees. Make sure that they're professional referees. Now, professional doesn't necessarily mean an employer, like a manager or something. It could be a teacher if you're a student. Perhaps it's someone who is from a sporting club or association that you're part of. Some other kind of contact that you have in a more professional capacity. What we're really avoiding are personal referees. We don't need to include people like family or friends, unless you've worked for them, then that's a bit of a different scenario. But if they're just personal referees, they don't really hold that much weight for a potential employer. A professional one is what they want to see. That's the person that they take seriously. So what information should we include? We need their first and last name, their title, the company they worked for, their phone number, and ideally their email address. The reason we try to include their email address is that increasingly people are almost going back to the old days and sending out emails with surveys rather than giving people calls. And also another benefit is that, I don't know about you, but I don't answer numbers that I don't recognize, at least not on my personal phone. I don't expect people to answer my number if they don't recognize it either. So if I don't have an opportunity to leave a message, for example, maybe their message bank is full, I can send up a follow-up email to say, "Hi, I'm Jeremy from the Skills and Job Centre and I'm seeking a reference for Tom Smith." Okay, if you followed all the points that I've just discussed, you should have a really effective resume. So the next part we're going to talk about is how to write an effective application letter or cover letter. This is really overthought by most people, and it's actually a very simple thing to do. I like to follow a 3 or 4 paragraph structure for almost 99% of people. You don't need to write a whole lot of information. You just need to enhance what you've already written in your resume. You're basically adding a couple of extra layers of depth and a little bit of personality as well. To write the letter, start off with, as you can see in the overlay that I'm presenting now, your details, your name and contact information. Then have their name or their title and the company's details. So if you know the person, maybe say Tom Smith or whoever it might be, and their title, the company, the phone number, their email address, maybe their website. As much information as you can include from them if possible. If they don't have any of that kind of information available, at least write hiring manager, the company, and their website. At least that will be enough. Then the next bit's just the simple greeting, dear Mr. Smith, or to the hiring manager, whatever you feel comfortable with, just something simple. Just avoid to whom it may concern. You should be at least able to assume that it's a hiring manager. Once you've written the greeting, the next little bit is the regarding line. So reline. This is a simple heading that's going to be bolded and make it very clear what you're applying for. So simply RE colon, and it might be position application. Typically I would use the title of the position. So say I was applying for a retail role, retail position application. Then once we've got this, we're now ready to go into the actual bulk of the cover letter. The first paragraph is where you really need to grab their attention and show your passion, your interest, your energy, and the core reason why you think you're the best applicant for the role. So something like, I'm excited to apply for this role because I bring XYZ to the table. It only needs to be 3 to 4 sentences in this paragraph, and just to the point. Be positive, be energetic, and focus on how you benefit them. Then in the paragraph 2 and potentially paragraph 3 as well, if you're following a 4 structure, we're now going into a little bit more detail. We're using examples, maybe talking about where we've worked and how we used some of the skills and attributes that they're looking for. Basically what you're doing is grabbing all the things that they say they're looking for, as much as is true to you, and saying, I have this, or I do this, or I am this. But it should be nice and simple. Again, you only usually need 3 to 4 sentences per paragraph, maybe 5 or 6 if it's a bit more detail needed. And then the final paragraph is a very brief summary. I again believe I'm well suited to this role due to my experience and skills that I have to offer. And it's a call to action. Basically that you're looking forward to discussing your application further at their earliest convenience. Essentially what you're saying is, interview me, without directly saying, interview me. It's just you basically got to be confident without being cocky. You've got to be to the point without just being too blunt. It's a very simple way to write a cover letter. And this is, again, for a general cover letter. There are some times where you need to add more detail, especially when you're addressing something like a key selection criteria as part of a cover letter. And actually, let's deal with that right now. Depending on the job you're applying for, you might have to deal with addressing a key selection criteria as part of your application letter. If that's the case, what that means is you might have 2 up to 3 pages, but typically only need 1 or 2, to address the key selection criteria that they have listed in the job description or the job advertisement that they are looking for. If they want it as part of a cover letter, generally, and I would say 99% of the time, what they're looking for is not for you to address every criteria individually, but to group them together and make it flow as part of the letter. So you might go into a bit more detail to describe some examples or scenarios where you've done or demonstrated what they're looking for. I tend to group them together because usually there are some common traits. They might be talking about communication and customer service. They might be talking about organization and time management. They might be talking about handling difficult people, which you could also group into the customer service and communication potentially, or you could address it separately. You might be talking about how you apply learning and gain knowledge. Whatever it might be, whatever they're looking for, you just need to address these. Give some simple examples if you can, but again, still keep it fairly concise. They don't need to know all the detail. They just want to see that you can address it, give enough detail to actually prove to some extent, and pique their interest. When they interview, then they'll confirm whatever they need to confirm. The exception to these rules is when they ask you to address a key selection criteria as a separate document. Now, I would like to make a video about this subject separately at some stage. However, the brief version of it is, this is where you need to create a separate document in addition to the cover letter and resume, and you need to put all the key selection criteria, each point in, and address them individually. Now, again, this still doesn't need to be super, super long. Some people write way too much information in there. You just need to be able to write enough to demonstrate competency or understanding, or at least how you might deal with it if you haven't dealt with it already, and then move on to the next one. You might provide a simple example to demonstrate and prove those points. A cover letter is actually quite simple. And if you follow the formula that I have shown on screen, you'll find that you are able to write a very effective cover letter. It doesn't need to be super long. You just need to communicate effectively that you can do the role and subsidize or supplement or enhance or just add layers onto your existing resume. All of this together is an effective application. You'll find that you will get a lot more response to something like this that's very simple and easy to read, that cuts out all the additional waffle that so many people put in, that really addresses what the employer is looking for and shows that you are going to make their life better. That they would be silly to not at least interview you and probably to put you on. I hope by watching this video that you now feel a little bit more confident in how to write an effective application. If you are in the Gippsland area of Victoria, Australia, and would like some extra one-on-one support with your applications, perhaps you'd like us to review your application, please reach out via the link that I'll put in the description below. The support that the Skills and Jobs Centre provides is free of charge, and it's also no obligation. So you can choose to use the information we provide and the advice we give, or you can choose to ignore it. That's up to you. But we will always do our best to help you be an effective applicant and really show what you have to offer an employer. So again, if you would like some one-on-one support, please reach out. If you live anywhere else in Victoria and would like to be linked in with your local Skills and Jobs Centre, please feel free to reach out to us and we can provide you the right contact details. And if you're anywhere outside of Victoria and would like some kind of help, please reach out to your local service providers that deal with applications. There are so many services and there is so much information out there that it can be overwhelming, but it also can be such a waste to not get some extra help. At least get your resume reviewed, or at least get your cover letter reviewed. There are so many services and so many people out there waiting and ready to help you and really want to help you put your best foot forward. From all of us here at the Skills and Jobs Centre, we wish you all the best with your future applications, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Until then, take care and good luck. Bye.